All right, strap in everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into one of the most legendary conflicts in history, the Trojan War.
Ah, yes, the Trojan War.
We're talking ancient Greece, epic battles, gods and goddesses, meddling in human affairs, the whole shebang.
It's a story that's captivated people for centuries, and for good reason.
We've got our sources lined up, Homer's Iliad, of course,
Can't forget the Iliad.
plus other classic accounts and historical analyses.
We're going to really dig deep into what went down, why it matters.
And why, thousands of years later, this war still has such a hold on our imaginations.
Because it's not just about battles and heroes, The Trojan War really gets at the heart of human nature, the things that drive us, the choices we make, the consequences that ripple out from even the smallest actions.
It's like a mirror reflecting back some of our most fundamental desires and conflicts, even today.
Absolutely. So to really understand the Trojan War, we've got to set the stage. We're talking Bronze Age Greece.
A world of powerful city-states, each with its own king and army, all vying for power. And then you've got the Olympian gods and goddesses always looking for an opportunity to stir the pot.
Oh, they love to get involved. And they weren't exactly subtle about it either.
Which brings us to the event that really kicked off the whole Trojan War saga, the Judgment of Paris. But before we even get to Paris, we have to talk about a wedding.
Not just any wedding, mind you. This is the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph. And the guest list, none other than the entire Olympian pantheon.
Well, almost the entire pantheon.
There's always one, isn't there? In this case, it was Eris, the goddess of discord. And her name really says it all, doesn't it?
She was notorious for stirring up trouble, and she definitely lived up to her reputation at this wedding.
Picture this. The party's in full swing, everyone's having a grand time, nectar flowing freely, and suddenly, Eris tosses a golden apple into the crowd.
A golden apple. Sounds harmless enough.
But this wasn't just any apple. It was inscribed with the words, "To the fairest."
Oh, I see where this is going. Talk about an instant recipe for drama. Suddenly all the goddesses are eyeing each other, sizing each other up, wondering who deserves that apple.
And you've got some serious contenders in the running. Hera, the queen of the gods.
Known for her, well, her everything. Her beauty, her power, her, let's say, forceful personality.
Then you have Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. All about strategy, intellect, and knowing how to win.
And then there's Aphrodite,
The goddess of love and beauty.
who probably knew a thing or two about how to use her charms to get what she wanted.
Oh, absolutely. So you can imagine the tension in the air. Three powerful goddesses, each convinced she's the fairest of them all.
I wouldn't want to be Zeus trying to settle that argument.
Wisely, Zeus decides to stay out of it completely. Instead, he appoints a mortal Paris, a prince of Troy, to be the judge.
Poor Paris. Just imagine the pressure. You're a young prince, and you're suddenly thrust into this divine beauty contest, having to decide who gets the title of fairest. And to make matters worse, each goddess comes bearing gifts. Talk about a bribe.
Hera, always the pragmatist, promises Paris power and dominion over all of Asia. Athena, the warrior goddess, offers him victory in battle and unmatched wisdom.
And Aphrodite. Well, she knows what a young prince might find tempting. She promises Paris the love of Helen.
The most beautiful woman in the world, according to legend.
But there's just one little problem. Helen is already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta.
Ah, yes, that does complicate things a bit, doesn't it?
So, faced with this impossible choice, what does Paris do?
Perhaps swayed by Aphrodite's promise, or perhaps simply captivated by the idea of Helen's beauty, Paris chooses Aphrodite and awards her the golden apple.
And that choice sets off a chain reaction that will lead to the Trojan War.
Because Helen ends up going to Troy with Paris.
Now, whether she was abducted or went willingly is a matter of debate, but the point is, Menelaus, her husband, is not happy about this.
To put it mildly, this isn't just a personal matter, a lover's quarrel. This is a direct attack on Menelaus' honor.
And in this time and place, a king's honor was everything. It was tied to his power, his authority, his very right to rule. So this isn't just about a woman. This is about war.
Exactly. And Menelaus calls upon his powerful brother, Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, to help him get Helen back.
So now it's a family affair. But Agamemnon sees an opportunity here. He uses the situation to unite the Greek kingdoms under his command.
He invokes an ancient oath, the Oath of Tyndareus, which obligated all of Helen's former suitors to defend her marriage. A brilliant strategic move on Agamemnon's part.
So from this one golden apple and a prince's fateful choice, we have the seeds of a full-blown war. And not just any war. We're talking about a massive undertaking. A fleet of over 1,000 ships carrying the greatest warriors of Greece set sail for Troy.
It's a clash of civilizations, a conflict that will become the stuff of legends.
And at the heart of it all are these larger-than-life heroes, both Greek and Trojan.
Each with their own motivations, their own strengths, their own flaws, and understanding them is key to understanding the Trojan War itself. It really is mind-boggling when you think about it. 1,000 ships, the best warriors Greece had to offer, all because of one woman.
It really puts the epic in epic poem. But let's talk more about these heroes. You mentioned Achilles, right? The Greeks had him on their side.
Achilles, oh, he was in a league of his own. Practically invincible, they said, thanks to his mother, Thetis. She was a nymph, and when Achilles was a baby, she dipped him in the river Styx.
The river Styx. That's the river that flows through the underworld, right?
The very same, and anyone who bathed in its waters became invulnerable.
So Achilles was basically a demigod walking among mortals. No wonder he was such a fierce warrior.
He was, but Achilles, he also had a bit of a temper, and a whole lot of pride.
Ah, yes, the famous Achilles heel. Both literally and figuratively, it seems.
Exactly, and that pride, that anger, it ended up having a huge impact on the war. Remember that dispute with Agamemnon?
Oh, yeah. When Agamemnon took Briseis away from Achilles.
Briseis was a woman Achilles had captured during the war, and he was, shall we say, attached to her.
I can imagine Achilles wasn't too happy about having his prize taken away.
He was furious. So furious, in fact, that he refused to fight anymore. Withdrew from the entire war.
Wow. So the Greeks lost their greatest warrior right in the middle of this massive siege.
It was a major turning point, and the Trojans, led by Hector, they were more than happy to capitalize on the situation.
Hector, now he was the Trojan prince, right?
Hector was the eldest son of King Priam, and he was everything a Trojan prince should be. Brave, skilled in battle, devoted to his city and his family.
He sounds like the ideal hero.
He really was. He was a brilliant tactician, a fierce warrior, and he inspired his troops to fight even harder. With Achilles out of the picture, Hector really rallied the Trojans.
So even though they didn't have a demigod on their side, the Trojans still managed to hold their own.
Absolutely. Hector's leadership was crucial to their success. He pushed the Greeks back towards their ships, inflicted heavy losses on them.
It's interesting how the Trojan War wasn't just about armies clashing, but also about these powerful personalities and their leadership styles.
That's a great point. You've got Achilles, driven by passion and rage. And then you have Hector, more measured, more strategic, fighting for his home and his people.
And eventually, these two figures, these two heroes, they're going to face off in one of the most famous duels in all of literature.
The duel between Achilles and Hector, it's a moment that's captured the imagination of poets and storytellers for centuries.
So how'd it go down? I'm guessing Achilles' rage finally got the better of him?
Well, fueled by grief and the desire for revenge, remember, Hector had killed Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend.
Right, Patroclus was wearing Achilles' armor, and Hector, he didn't know it wasn't actually Achilles he was facing.
It was a tragic case of mistaken identity, really. But Achilles, he blamed Hector for Patroclus' death.
So I'm guessing there wasn't much of a fair fight happening here.
It was a brutal duel, and in the end, Achilles, with his divine power, he was victorious.
But even in victory, there was still a sense of tragedy.
Oh, absolutely, because what Achilles did after he killed Hector, it was shocking. He desecrated Hector's body, dragged it behind his chariot.
Wow. That's pretty intense.
It was an act of pure rage, pure grief, and it shows just how brutal war can be, how it can twist even the greatest heroes into something almost monstrous.
So the Trojans lost their greatest warrior, their leader. It must have been a devastating blow.
It was, but even without Hector, they still held strong. Those walls of Troy, they were legendary. It seemed like the Greeks would never be able to break through.
So how did they finally do it? How did they manage to conquer Troy after 10 long years of war?
Well, that's where Odysseus comes in. Odysseus, the brilliant strategist, the man who always had a plan, he knew that brute force wasn't going to be enough. They needed something else, something cunning.
And that's where the Trojan Horse comes in, right?
Trojan Horse, one of the most famous military strategies of all time.
It's a story everyone's heard of, but I'd love to hear you break it down. How did it actually work?
Well, imagine you're a Trojan. You've been fighting this war for 10 years, you're tired, you want it to be over, and one day, you see the Greek ships sailing away.
They're retreating. Finally.
Except they've left something behind, a giant wooden horse, a magnificent structure seemingly offered as a gift to the goddess Athena.
A peace offering.
Seemed that way. And the Trojans, they were weary of war. They wanted to believe it was a sign of victory, a sign that the gods were on their side.
So they brought the horse inside the city walls.
They did. They dragged it through the gates, celebrating what they thought was their triumph.
Little did they know.
Little did they know that inside the horse, hidden within its hollow belly, were some of the best Greek warriors, led by Odysseus himself.
Oh, the suspense. Imagine being one of those Greek soldiers crammed inside that horse waiting for the signal to attack.
It must have been agonizing. But Odysseus, he had planned everything perfectly. Under the cover of night, the Greeks snuck out of the horse, opened the city gates, and let in the rest of the Greek army who had secretly sailed back.
The Trojans, they never stood a chance.
It was a complete surprise attack. And the fall of Troy, it was brutal. The Greeks, after 10 years of fighting, they finally had their revenge.
So the Greeks have finally conquered Troy after a decade of fighting. But as we know, victory doesn't always equal a happy ending, especially in the world of Greek mythology.
Oh, definitely not. In fact, for Odysseus, the hero of the Trojan Horse, the journey is far from over.
His story actually continues in another epic poem by Homer, the Odyssey.
Exactly. The Odyssey is all about Odysseus' journey home to Ithaca. And let me tell you, it was anything but a smooth sailing.
You'd think that after 10 years of war, he'd be eager to just get back to his wife and family.
You would. But the gods, they had other plans for Odysseus.
What kind of plans? Was it more divine meddling?
Oh, there was plenty of that. Storms, shipwrecks, encounters with mythical creatures, you name it, Odysseus faced it. His journey home ended up taking another 10 years.
Wow, so 20 years away from home in total? That's almost unimaginable.
It really is. And throughout it all, Odysseus is tested time and time again. His strength, his cunning, his loyalty, everything is pushed to the limit.
It sounds like his journey home was almost as epic as the war itself.
It absolutely was. And it's all about those themes of resilience, perseverance, and that deep longing for home.
Okay, so walk me through it. What were some of the challenges Odysseus faced on this journey?
Well, one of the most famous encounters is with the Cyclops Polyphemus.
A cyclops.
Yeah.
Like a giant with one eye.
That's the one. Polyphemus happens to be the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea.
Uh-oh. That can't be good for Odysseus if he's trying to sail home.
It wasn't. Odysseus and his men, they end up trapped in the Cyclops cave. And let's just say, things get pretty intense.
I bet. How do they escape from a giant, one-eyed monster?
Odysseus, being the clever guy he is, comes up with a plan. He gets Polyphemus drunk, blinds him with a sharpened stake, and then when the Cyclops lets his sheep out to graze, Odysseus and his men cling to the underside of the sheep and escape unnoticed.
That's some serious ingenuity.
It was. But escaping the Cyclops wasn't the end of Odysseus's troubles. He also encountered the Sirens.
The sirens. Those are the creatures who lure sailors to their deaths with their beautiful singing, right?
Exactly. They're incredibly dangerous because their voices are so mesmerizing, so enchanting, that sailors can't resist them. They crash their ships on the rocks, and that's the end.
So how did Odysseus survive that?
He knew about the Sirens' deadly power, so he had his men plug their ears with beeswax. But Odysseus, he wanted to hear the Sirens' song for himself. So he had his men tie him to the mast of the ship so he could listen without succumbing to their enchantment.
Talk about willpower.
It was a close call, but he made it through. And that's just a taste of the adventures Odysseus had on his way home. He traveled to the land of the lotus eaters, where his men got addicted to these magical plants that made them forget about everything else. He even had to journey into the underworld, the realm of the dead, to consult the prophet Tiresias.
Wow. It's like he went through a greatest hits of Greek mythology.
You could say that. But through it all, Odysseus never gave up. He kept his goal in mind, his home, his family, and that kept him going.
So after all that, he finally made it back to Ithaca.
He did. But even then, his challenges weren't over. Because while he was away, things had changed.
In what way?
Well, everyone assumed Odysseus was dead. He'd been gone for 20 years, after all. And in his absence, a bunch of suitors had descended upon his palace, hoping to marry Penelope, his wife, and take over his kingdom.
That's awful. Imagine finally making it home after all that, only to find out that your kingdom's been overrun by these guys trying to steal your wife and your throne.
It was a difficult situation for Odysseus to walk into. He was outnumbered, and nobody recognized him. He had to be careful.
So what did he do?
He disguised himself as a beggar and snuck into his own palace. He wanted to observe the suitors, figure out who he could trust, and come up with a plan.
It's like a Trojan Horse strategy, but in reverse.
Exactly. He was playing the long game. And in the end, with the help of his son, Telemachus, and the goddess Athena, who was always looking out for him, Odysseus was able to defeat the suitors and reclaim his kingdom.
That's so satisfying.
It is. And it's a reminder that even though the journey might be long and difficult, even though there might be setbacks along the way, it's important to never lose sight of your goals.
Odysseus is truly one of the most enduring characters in literature. His story has everything: adventure, danger, wit, loyalty, and ultimately that triumph over adversity.
He embodies so many human qualities, both the good and the bad. He makes mistakes, he's not perfect, but he never gives up. And that's what makes him so relatable and inspiring.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the Trojan War.
From the judgment of Paris to the fall of Troy, and then Odysseus' epic journey home, it's a story that continues to fascinate us thousands of years later.
It's a story about war, about heroes, about the gods and goddesses, but ultimately it's a story about what it means to be human.
And we hope you enjoyed exploring it with us.